Nothing prepares you for India. This is what I was told by a Canadian woman I met in Myanmar when I told her I was headed there next. And I kept hearing the same thing from most people when I told them that my partner and I were going to go to India. I remember the night before we flew to Kolkata, talking on the phone with my parents. They traveled India in the 1980s, and I'd grown up listening to stories they often told about their time there. I told my parents that we thought we'd be totally fine adjusting to India. We'd been traveling for months. I'll never forget how my dad chuckled and said, "Nowhere in the world is like India. Don't worry, you'll see." My dad was absolutely right. The first few weeks in India especially, we had some frustrating moments and exhausting days, and we experienced culture shock and our fair share of Delhi belly. I think what the women in Myanmar and my own parents said about India being tough to prepare for as a traveler is a common narrative. India has this reputation of being a place that you're guaranteed to feel culture shock. And I understand why. Culturally, it's very different from the USA or from Canada, but I think as Westerners, many of us have very stereotyped perceptions of India. And many of these stereotypes are deeply unfair, and they paint India in a very homogenous way. It's important to recognize that India is a diverse country. It's full of different ethnicities, languages, cultures, foods, and lifestyles. So today we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about perceptions of India with Anuj. Anuj is actually a listener of this show. He and I have been messaging back and forth for quite some time, and eventually I realized that we should just bring our conversation onto the podcast. So here we are. Welcome, Anuj.
Thank you for having me.
We're so glad to have you. And it's kind of funny because today is Saturday. It's 4 p.m. for us, and you're in Australia, and you're in the future. It's Sunday over there, Sunday morning. So I wanted to start by asking if you could share with us your story, where you were born and how you got to where you are now, which is, I believe, Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah, so I currently live in Melbourne, Australia. I was born in Ahmedabad. It's a city, one of the largest cities in India, in a state of Gujarat. I migrated to Australia when I was 20 years old, so in mid-2000s. I came here for studies and then just stayed here. And this is a very common practice for a lot of Indians. So they either go to a very well-known English-speaking country for higher education and then settle down in that country. So yeah, here I am 16 years later. I'm really enjoying Australia. And I call my second home. So my perception of Australia is it's my father country and India is my mother country.
Aw. And why did you pick Australia? Like, what prompted that? Because you could have picked, I know lots of people from India end up coming to Canada for their studies as well. So what was it that drew you to Australia?
It is a good question. I originally, every Indian wants to go to North America for some reason. But the biggest culture in India right now is cricket, and North America has nothing. And I'm a huge sport fan. Australia has cricket, Australia has tennis, and Melbourne has both. So that was sort of a draw card for me. I want to go somewhere where it's decent weather and decent sport. Didn't think about that. I'm going to be in love in this city that I'm not even going to move anywhere else.
That's awesome. So I wanted to ask a bit about, I'm not going to say the name right, about the city that you were born in, Ahmedabad. Could you explain a little bit about Gujarat and what it was like growing up there?
So Gujarat is, Ahmedabad, for example, is quite large city. I think it's top 10 most populated in India. It's pretty big. I would assume there is about 5 million plus population right now. So growing up in Gujarat is, all my friends are from my state, my city. When I was growing up, there is not a lot of interstate migrations around. So this was back in 80s and 90s. Yeah, growing up in India was a ball. I loved it. But when I came to Australia, I realized that a lot of the people here are growing up very differently, right? So, for example, one of the things that my city people will be scared of are dogs, because we have lots of stray dogs and they run after you. So a lot of my friends and me also are not comfortable around the dogs. Whereas in Australia, well, dog is a second kid or first kid sometimes. That's one thing. The other thing is the infrastructure wise. So in 90s, when I was growing up, the infrastructure wasn't as good in India because it was still, growing rapid pace, but infrastructure wasn't catching up. So, for example, it is very common for an Aussie to know swimming. Like they will just do it casually on in sea or lake, or they can go to whatever. But my age Indians, a lot of them won't know swimming, or they will learn when they are adult because the infrastructure wasn't there, right? So there is subtle differences that a lot of Australians, a lot of my Aussie friends won't understand. So when I explain to them, look, we had electricity outages on Tuesdays in mid 90s when I was in like 5th grade or 7th grade or something like that. I can't even remember, but we had a lot of outages. It's like when we talk about this in front of my Australian friends, it's just, like they will be like, oh wow, is that used to be like that? And I'm like, yeah, it is, but it's not there now. So if you go to India and migrate it, it's very good. Like it's very modern. It's like we're talking 15 years or 20 years. I've seen India grow from where I grew up into what it is now. It's mind blowing. So, so now even like if I go back now, it will be like at least 20 new roads, 20 new suburbs being built. And it's just rapid growth.
Wow. I have to go back to the thing about the dogs because I wrote a journal when we were traveling in India. We were there for 2 months and I would write all the time about how afraid I was of the street dogs because they would approach me and like sometimes chase me, and I became kind of scared of them. And I thought that was so funny because like in Canada, when you grow up, like dogs are friendly, you like them, you keep them in your house. And that was the first time in my life that I actually felt like a little bit afraid of dogs. So it's funny to hear that you also felt that way. So we've touched on it a little bit, but people talk often about how Western tourists experience culture shock when they go to India, but I'm curious to hear whether you or your wife experienced any form of culture shock when you first arrived in Australia.
Oh yeah, like when we arrived to Australia, the biggest thing is like silence. Like there is no noise. I mean, what's going on? So in India, you have people honking the street, but in Australia, there is absolutely nothing, like silence. And it feels like there's no one around. I mean, obviously there's a lot less population, but when I landed in Australia at like 8 p.m., I'm like, where are everyone? That was my first reaction. And the other thing is, for me specifically, it's the tap drinking, right? So in India, people store water in the house or the apartment they live in. There's a big tank at the top of the building. And it's not pure because India doesn't have a running water. And then come to Australia and then you start drinking from the tap. Like you see it in movies and you read it, you know it. But when you do it, it's very different. Like it doesn't feel right because we always used to drink from like a stored place, either in the fridge or like there could be a vessel in somewhere where you just open the tap and drink it. So there's one place only. But here, like every tap can drink it. And like everything shuts down at 5 or 6. And it was very different because in India, nothing shuts down. Like life starts after 7. So even the working hours in India are like 10 o'clock to even 10:30 to like 6 or 7. And everything runs very late because maybe it's where I am from. It's very hot. So it's a lot later. But here, 5 o'clock, done. But now I'm so used to it. Because I want to go home at 5 too. So it is very different. But it's all positive because these are the things that you don't want to do in India.
It's funny because like the things that you describe as being surprising to you in Australia or like difficult to adjust to, like the tap water thing, for example, for us, like as Westerners going to India, learning that you can't drink the tap water, it's literally the opposite thing that is surprising when you're coming from the West to India, because it was like for us, the noise caused culture shock for us. And for us, it was the fact that we could only drink bottled water. So it's funny how it's like literally just flipped. And I have to ask about the honking, because why do people honk their horns so much in India?
I actually don't understand it as well. So like it's going on since I'm alive, right? So it is just the norm that everybody honks. Like I can see the declining trend easily. Like last time I was in India, it was so much more silent than it used to be. When I learned driving, it was very, very, very noisy in the road. And you are taught to honk all the time.
I'm so curious now if when we go back, we had planned to travel to India again last year. Obviously, we had to cancel the trip because of COVID, but we're going to rebook it. So I'm curious now, since it'll be a few years in between our two trips, whether we'll notice less honking when we go back. I always think of Varanasi because Varanasi was the city where it was just like everyone was honking all the time. It was so nuts. I'm curious how many listeners would know this, but let's touch on it. So there's a legacy of colonialism in India. In the 19th century, India was under British rule up until 1947. And there are plenty of people that are still alive who remember this period. So I'm curious if you, growing up in India or going there as an adult, have seen how this history of colonialism has shaped India and maybe India's culture today, or how it persists still.
So there are two parts to the story, right? So when growing up, you get taught what happened during colonization. So it's a incident by incident sort of a report. So like in 1957 or 1857, this happened, this happened, 1921, this happened, right? So when you are studying that, it's a factual based historical study, right? This happened X year X, Y year Y. So not understand what the consequences are for that, right? And India has been independent since 1947. So when I'm growing up, it's almost 50 years, right? So even my parents are born around or after the independence. But now I am quite intellectual and now I can understand what happened. So I started reading the books. Like, so one of the person that is very vocal against colonization is the person named Shashi Tharoor. He is the Indian politician. He has a book. It's called An Era of Darkness. I would suggest if you want to understand the colonization history, maybe read that book. But in crux of it, before the British came to India or started ruling India, India was producing almost more than 20% of world's GDP. So India was that rich. And when they left in 1947, British left, India was less than 0.5% of the GDP. And obviously population growth was crazy too. So just putting those stats in, just see how much it damaged India. And India since then is trying to recover it. It is recovering it, but it's going to take time. It's 200 years of smashing. And once you get free, it'll take few years to just understand, oh, now we can do something. And India being democracy, it takes a little bit longer. That's why India has a lot of things to catch up since British rule came up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I don't know, you've listened to this show, so we talk pretty often about how important it is to educate yourself about this kind of history when you travel somewhere. And so obviously I think it is important that anyone, especially if you're coming from a country with a colonial legacy, that you do a bit of work to understand how colonialism has impacted the country that you're visiting. And so I wanted to ask, do you think that this history of colonialism impacts the experience of white people who travel to India these days?
Actually, no, because India has a thing called Atithi Devo Bhava. So that's how it's said in Hindi. in translating, it is like guests are always welcome. Yeah, I mean, there is a dark past, but people don't care about it as much, because if you care about the past, you will never grow, right? So you learn from the past. But now, if you go to India, it is quite good. So all the people are welcomed really well in India. So you actually have more. So give you an example. One of my friend went to India and she took a rural tour, because in villages you don't get to see tourists a lot. She was a star of the show, and a lot of the kids and they took photos of her with, and kids took photos with her, and everything was like that. She was even invited in the wedding which was happening in a temple. So it actually doesn't impact a lot. I mean, I think people in India have moved on from it, and everything is all about tourism nowadays. I mean, if you go to the right places, yeah.
Oh, totally. And we definitely experienced that when we were there ourselves. Like, everyone we met was super welcoming, and we just had an incredible experience. At the top of the show, I mentioned how there are a lot of perceptions about what India is like. And one of the things that I hear often is that India isn't safe for tourists. I remember, like, even myself, when my partner and I were telling people that we were going to go to India, they were like, oh, you be careful. You have to be so careful. And we found this kind of funny because, I mean, like, I agree, everywhere you travel, you need to be careful to a certain degree, but I found it funny that people felt that way specifically about India. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this perception, and if there's any other perceptions that you've noticed people tend to have about India.
Yeah, so the exact same perception that everybody has about India. Like, a lot of people will ask me, like, oh, is India unsafe destination? I always say to them, that's not the right question. It's not about being unsafe or safe. It can be unsafe anywhere. Like, it can be unsafe in Europe or America or anywhere. It's all about the destination that you choose, right? So if you choose somewhere that there is no tourism, then you'll feel strange over there. But if it's lots of tourism, like you've been to Varanasi, you will feel it safe. But on the outside, it will feel unsafe. But when you are inside, it's not as bad, right? Obviously, there is a lot of chaos in India. There's like a lot of people, like million people out there, right? That's why people will think, oh, it's unsafe because there's a lot of people. But when you have a lot of people, that's actually safe, because there is a lot less thieves, a lot less. Yeah, I mean, if you go alone somewhere in an area where there is no tourism, then it's obviously unsafe. It's as unsafe as going to Africa and go for a walk in a lion safari, right? So it is important to ask, how do you travel? Like, other than where do you travel, right? So are you practicing safe travel strategies, or are you already feared about it? So if you are already fearful about going there, then get any small little hiccup, like even the pocket that gets stolen, you'll be like, oh, I got robbed. I mean, there are no guarantees. Like, you can go to like a France and you can still get pickpocketed, So, but it's the perception in your mind that, oh, I got pickpocketed in India, but that could happen anywhere, right? If you're going somewhere very rural or very unexplored places, then you have to take the local. For example, if I go to East India or North India or something, I will feel lost because I'm not from that area and it is so different. So I will always take a tour there. Even being an Indian, I'm not going by myself.
Yeah. I can confirm about the pickpocketing thing because I have been pickpocketed in Montreal, like in my own country. I've been pickpocketed in Amsterdam. It always happens like in the places that you don't expect it to happen.
And also on that, so if the travelers behave badly, you're going to expect the same return, right? So there will be a reaction to it. And it happens everywhere. Like if you go to Brazil, it will be like the same. So it's how you travel or where you travel is the more question than, is entire India unsafe? Like, not really. But you need to be careful on what you do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like it's a bit of a generalization. I personally felt completely safe the entire time we were in India. And I do think it's a little bit about like your mindset going in and just the way that you travel. I think, like, as with traveling anywhere, it's also important to emphasize that as a tourist, we don't always experience the realities of a place, especially when the places that we visit are sort of catering to tourists, especially. So I'm curious, like, obviously there are realities of India that tourists don't typically get exposed to or see. What are some of the realities that you think tourists are missing when they visit India?
So one of the thing is India is huge, like in terms of culture, nature, everything, right? If people expect to see India in one go, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, there is no chance, right? It is so large. You might only be able to visit 2 or 3 states. It's like every state has a different culture. So that's the reality of India. Like if people say, I've been to India for 10 days, then you have not seen India. Like you have seen only 1% of India. So the reality is that if you really want to visit, maybe stay 1 year or maybe just do it 10, 20 times in your lifetime. Or just have an expectation that, look, I'm never going to see it. I just want to highlight it and just finish it off there. Yeah. And that's what everybody needs to expect, right?
Yeah, I can say, like, from personal experience, we found it so interesting because, like, we traveled across India for 2 months straight. And so we would like stay in a state for a while and then move to another one. And we would always notice how, like, we would take a train overnight and we would wake up in a place and the language would be a bit different and people's, like, mannerisms would be a bit different and the culture and the food would be a bit different. And it always blew our minds because it's like, yesterday we were in another place and it was, like, so different. It was really, like, amazing to see how diverse India is just, like, from taking one train ride overnight.
Yeah. So my golden sentence is India is like Europe without borders.
Yeah.
So each state is a country in Europe, and with population size almost, it's different food, different language, different culture, different history, different everything. Even the climate is different, right? So sometimes you see, oh, India is hot, but it's not. Yeah. So it's hot and not. It's like Europe. Just expect what you do. Like, do you expect Europe to be visited in 2 weeks? Like you think entire Europe is visited? No, it's not.
Totally. The hot cold thing is funny too, because we were in South India and we went up to the hill stations. We went to one called Munnar and it was freezing. And because it had been so hot, like, we didn't have a lot of warm clothing with us. So I remember wearing, like, I had all my shirts on and my one jacket and I was just, like, wearing all of my clothing, trying to stay warm. So I think a lot of people, when they think of India, they think of poverty. I know even from my own travels there that there's a real spectrum of privilege. We did witness poverty while we were there, but we also had the opportunity to visit, like, very developed cities, places that were, like, incredibly westernized. So I think, like, there is indeed poverty, but there's also a middle class and there is a wealthy class. Why do you think it's important for tourists to recognize that there isn't just poverty in India, which I think tends to be a generalization?
Yeah, so there are two parts of the story, right? So as we explored earlier about British colonization, so the poverty is because of them. I can safely say that the poverty in India wouldn't have existed before the British rule, right? So if a foreign tourists come about and visit, like, see poverty in India, you have to link it back to why. And that is so important in my mind that everybody should do that. The wealthy class is extreme wealth, like one of those big fat Asian Indian wedding kind of a wealthy, right? And then there is a huge middle class, which are the biggest consumers, right? Yeah, so it is so important for the tourists just to not visit slums, right? And even if you do, you have to connect it with why are they slums. And then if you are going with a tour, your tour guide is most likely to be a middle class person. So maybe engage with your tour guide and go and ask him instead of going to slum, where is he, what is he doing, what does he do every day. That could be totally different to what you see in slums, like totally different. And that's the real part of India, like not the poor. Like there is different levels of richness in India, and I would love for visitors to see all of them.
One thing that we did when we were traveling there, we always traveled by train, and we would take different classes of train. So sometimes like there was one trip where we paid like the highest amount and got into the nicest car. And then we got to meet all the people there and like made friends with the people there. And then another time we went in sleeper class. And so we met all the people in sleeper class, and we would do all the different like levels of expensive for the train. But it was like a really good way to sort of like get insight into the sort of different ways that people are living, because I think the train sort of was representative of like those different parts of society.
Yeah, it is actually very interesting that you did that. I mean, that's very fascinating way. Like that's actually perfect way to see how different India is. And you would have experienced like, look, the first year AC class have very different people. They probably speak amazing English, and they are like well dressed and everything. And whereas I think the last class, I don't know what it's called now, but without the AC, non-sleeper, it will be packed with people, and it will be in the same train. But also there is one above the first class is the airline. Like, so people don't even go into the train. A lot of my friends now have stopped going by train. And when we were growing up in India, like there was not a lot of flights, or flights were inaccessible because it was so expensive. When I was growing up, my dad used to take us around almost every summer vacation. And we used to take a train, like 30 hours train, right? From where we are into South India or something. I cannot even imagine doing that now. That's amazing. Actually, like that's a good way to look at how it is. And then you can get access to it in the airports.
Yeah. I loved taking the train in India. It was my favorite thing to do, especially the overnight trains. I had the best sleep on the overnight train. I loved it so much.
So it is amazing because you would have seen all the small stations and the different food culture. They'll just come on trains. Yeah, you would see like people just barge onto the train and they want to sell something to you. They want to sell some food. It's very brave of you to do that, honestly.
Yeah, I loved getting the food. We were always buying food and chai from the guys who would hop on the train. We never knew what it was. We would just be like, okay, we'll try it.
Yeah, it's mostly all vegetarian, so you'll be fine. And the good thing about those food is it's churns so quickly, so it's hardly ever going to be bad because it's hot, and the churn rate is so high that it'll most likely to be very, very fresh.
Yeah, so we were really lucky to be able to spend a full 2 months in India. So we traveled from Kolkata across to Rajasthan, and then we went through the south for a month. And I think because we saw different parts of the country, we were really able to see and understand how diverse India is. How would you describe like the diversity of India? In what ways is there diversity there?
So I think I've said earlier, it's the Europe. Just think about it as a Europe thing. So you'll have each state, different language, different food, and even different climate, right? So for example, you went to, I think you went from Kolkata. So from east all the way to west, and you would have seen like the weather patterns would be different. Even the trees would be different. The food is extremely different. I think Kolkata is more, they probably can buy seafood in Kolkata. That could be the best place to buy seafood. And in Rajasthan, you would see a lot of chicken. So, and then my state is pure vegetarian. So everything is vegetarian in my state. It is just surprised. Like it is so diverse, and everything has a different language to it. So if you think, oh, you can learn one language and you'll be fine. Yeah, you probably can speak English and Hindi. You'll be okay. But if you want to interact with local, either you need to have a guide because they're speaking different language, or you need to learn one of them. It's because the reason being so diverse is the history part of India. Like thousands of years ago, these are all small kingdoms of different kings. Even before the colonization, India was ruled by Mughals. So the difference between Mughals and Britishers was Mughals stayed in India and they made India more prosperous because they wanted to stay and thrive, whereas Britishers took things away to their own country. Like before Mughals, there was different like small tribes or rulers, and there was different empires in the back. So Indian history could go back 5, 7, 8, 10,000 years. And that's why the cultures in India developed so differently, and the languages are different. Even within the same state, you could have different dialects of same language. And you can go from south to north in the same state, you'll see different food because it's based on how everything was derived thousands of years ago. And it's still said as it is.
Mm. Are Mughals, are they kings? Is what that?
Yeah, they were the kings, yeah. So as far as I know, the Mughals were linked to Genghis Khan, but they are the one who made India very, very prosperous.
I've heard that a lot of people in India can speak like multiple languages. Is that true?
It is true. I hope so. It's still true. Back in my time, it was true. So I at least speak 3 languages. And the good thing is that all the different languages, so Hindi, Gujarati, Punjabi, and Rajasthani, Marathi, that's Maharashtra, all of these languages were derived out of probably same language in the past and very similar sounding. But if you go to South India, the languages are very different. Like I wouldn't understand a single word of it. But whereas if somebody speaks Punjabi, I might get few words, but not the language. But then if somebody starts speaking Marathi, I might get few words. And same with them. If I'm speaking Gujarati, they might understand some words because it's slightly different grammar and slightly different term in vocabulary, but you still get it. But it's very, it's very common to have 2-3 languages, And now the new generation, so the next generation are learning one of the European languages. So it'll be fun. It'll be 4 languages.
I remember we were in Tamil Nadu and we were there when the movie Bahubali 2 came out. And everyone was so excited. And we found out later it was because this is a Tamil movie. So people were like really excited about it because it was a movie like in their language. And everyone we met was like, you have to go see this movie. So we did. Like the week that it opened, we went and we got a ticket and we went and we watched it and we didn't understand any of it. But it was just fun to like be with everyone else and see how excited everyone was for the movie. Bhali, 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 ra, bhali. Sahore Bahubali.
Yeah, so that movie, honestly, was obviously produced in Tamil Nadu. And yeah, that's as big as Game of Thrones. Like, that was...
it was huge.
It was big. It was huge. Like, I would not, be wrong in saying that probably made the most amount of money in India. Like, because they produced in different languages as well. So it was translated in Hindi. Like, even my wife and we were excited for Bahubali 2. When the second one came out.
Yeah. So, you can watch it in English too. Like it's been dubbed now in English as well.
Oh, okay. Like people would have, I don't know if it has happened when you watch it, but then they would have stand up when the hero would have appeared in the screen and then whistled it or clapped or something. That's that's amazing sometimes. It's very masculine thing to do, like in India, when the main lead actor comes on, people will just clap.
So I mentioned at the top of the show that there are some unfair stereotypes and a lot of misconceptions about India. So I wanted to ask what you think are the biggest ones that you find visitors might think about India that are wrong.
Well, first of all, I think toilets. People think India doesn't have toilets or weird toilets. It's not true. Unless you go to very remote or regional area where you're not supposed to, then you have a problem. So that's one of the stereotypes that I get asked. The food, everybody says food gives you diarrhea. Delhi belly is the thing. I'm like, yeah, Delhi belly is the thing if you have cold food all the time. If you and you said that you kept on eating street foods of station, which I even don't dare to do, but you probably did get sick or didn't get sick, but
I'm trying to remember. I don't think I did. I don't think I ever got Delhi belly.
That's the thing. The thing that you've got to be careful is you have to have hot food, and hot in the sense temperature hot, and make sure you tell them that you want to have less spicy, because in India it's quite a very spicy food. If you stick to two rule of thumbs, like have hot food, less spicy food, then you'll be fine, because the churn in India of the food, like a lot of people eat a lot of things, and then the food is cooked every day. So you will not get Delhi belly. I mean, but don't expect that you won't. You might, because it's a thing, but if you are careful, you'll be fine. And the other thing is that people think is India will scam foreigners. I don't think it's valid, right? There are places where locals have different ticket prices and the foreigners have ticket prices, but it is not only India specific. I've been to South America and I've seen that. Like Machu Picchu is example, right? It is a standard practice across the board. So you don't expect India to do, we'll charge local the same and foreigners the same. No, because it's general traveling practice everywhere. You coming to India, you expect to pay more than local because they want to promote local. They want to promote local people to see Taj Mahal. It's their thing. But the difference is not going to be too high. Like you might have a little bit more to pay, but not 3, 4, 5 times.
The Taj Mahal, when we went, it was $20, which is not a lot of money if you're from a Western country at all. But people would complain about it, like, oh, but the locals only have to pay $2. Well, you come from a country where there's higher salaries, and $20 is not that much money.
And exactly same. I can tell this to Machu Picchu, right? Machu Picchu, we pay $80 for one person, and local are free entry. And I support that because tourism dollar is important, and you want to make locals to visit their monument too. So you want to make accessible to locals, plus you want to maintain that area as well. So you want to sort of balance it out, and that's how it works. And that's a very standard practice. I would say in Australia it'd be the same as well, but I don't know it.
I'm just thinking about the spicy food because I admittedly didn't eat a lot of spicy food before I went to India, and I really liked eating street food. And then I didn't have a choice about how spicy it was because they just would give it to me. And there were a lot of times that I was like, my head hurt because it was so spicy. And after 2 months, though, I had built up such a tolerance, and now I love spicy food and I eat it all the time at home.
Wow, that's a huge positive change.
Yeah.
I actually went the opposite. I came to Australia and stopped eating spicy food. I don't have tolerance of Indian spices.
Oh no. I used to have to like eat with lassi all the time. Like I would take a bite and then have to take some lassi to like neutralize the spice. So when I think about our time there, I think there are 2 specific things that caused a bit of culture shock for me, especially when we first arrived. The first thing is just the amount of people. India is the second most populous country in the world with about 1.3 billion people. And in the cities especially, you really feel this because of the crowds. And it's funny because I remember thinking that like, oh, it's just crowds. Like I can handle crowds. It won't bother me. I've been in a crowd before, but it's just different because it's crowds everywhere all the time. And that was a difficult adjustment. And then the second thing was, and I've mentioned it before, the sound. I remember especially in Varanasi just feeling overwhelmed because there was so much sound. And sometimes I felt like I couldn't think straight because of all the sound. It's funny because both those things I didn't think would have such an effect on me, but it really did take me, I'd say like 2 or 3 weeks to adjust once we arrived. And ever since going there on that trip, whenever people ask me about traveling to India, the first thing I tell them is try to go for longer than 2 or 3 weeks if you can. Like go for as long as you can, because in the beginning it feels overwhelming. And then once you sort of adjust, you'll enjoy it a lot more. It won't be stressful. So the longer, the better. But as someone who's lived both in India and Australia, are there aspects of India that you think tend to cause visitors to feel overwhelmed?
Yeah, so exactly as you said, sound, yeah. I mean, the Western countries, like especially in Australia, is very quiet. And that was one of my opposite culture shock, right? So it's very crowded. Like India got so many people. It's very crowded. It's full on. I mean, it got a lot going on. Like it's traffic, it's sound, noise, air pollution is quite a lot as well. So you need to adjust to those levels when you go to India. Like the air quality is very different. The sound so loud. Like you'll still hear traffic noise in the night. So you need to adjust to that. It's like jet lag, but sound lag and air lag, So,
Yeah.
and that takes longer because once you get used to it, you won't even hear it. And the moment you get off the airplane, like get off the airport, you'll straight into it, like you driving and then honking and sound, and it's hear various different sound notes. So that's the climate that I call it. You need to adjust. And same with jet lag, you got to adjust time zone, you got to adjust the climate as well. And everything runs late. So because of so many people, like you don't expect to arrive. Like if you're booked at 10 o'clock, most likely everything will run an hour or 2 hours late everywhere. So these are the things that everyone needs to expect in India, like noise, air quality, the traffic and the timing, right? And we call it the ISTs, like Indian stretched time. It's not an Indian standard time, it's Indian stretched time. Everything runs a little bit late.
I love that. I know we would always say to each other, like, we should never make plans in India. We just have to see how things go and like see what happens. Not having a plan was better because then you could just sort of like figure things out as it went.
And this is this is very important to know, because as a Western tourist, you would expect everything to run on time. Everything will be in places, but it's not gonna happen. Like the expectations need to be set as like, oh no, things are gonna run late. Things are gonna be noisy. You're gonna hit traffic. You might be stuck there for an hour or so in the same spot. You probably could have walked because of the amount of people are there. And that's the beauty of it. And a lot of people say, oh, it's so hard to drive in India. Dad. I love driving in India. The first thing I do, get off my plane, is get my dad's car and drive around.
Yeah.
It's a skill. It's an art. I mean, if you can drive over there, it's so easy everywhere else. Yeah.
Oh, totally. I mean, I remember my parents saying to me, because my parents have also traveled there. They traveled in India in the 80s. And I remember like telling them the day or so before we flew into Kolkata, I told my dad, oh, like we'll be fine. We've been traveling around Asia. So I think like it won't shock us. We'll adjust quickly. And my dad started laughing and he was like, haha, no, nothing is like India. Like you won't understand it until you're there. And he was totally right. So in one of our earlier episodes, we interviewed the woman behind the No White Saviors campaign. And one thing that they emphasized to us was that they wish that people who visit Uganda, which is where they're from, as well as other parts of Africa, visit to see and share the beauty of those places. And I can say that personally, I experienced an immense amount of beauty in India, from wonderful conversations with people to gorgeous architecture and landscapes. And honestly, even though some people might view the chaos of some of the cities as bad, I actually really liked it. I thought it was like really exciting, and there was just always so much to look at and take in. It was just amazing to be in it and be able to observe like that energy and all the movement within the city. So what beauty do you, as someone from India, hope that tourists will look for when they visit India?
According to me, in my opinion, the tourists need to pick a time, like a theme of going to India, right? So if you want to just see highlights, just do 5 places, 2 weeks. You don't see India, you just see highlights, right? Few key points. But then if you want to go longer, then you got to pick and choose the themes that you want to, like if you just have a limited time, but you want to go somewhere, then pick a theme, right? If you want to do safari, right? If you want to just see cities or rural area, pick those areas and stay there for a little longer, because it only give you exact idea of what it is. And slow travel is amazing in India too. Like as you've done 2 months in India, you would know, like if you go via train or by car to one place to other, you'll see a lot of different small things in the middle, which you don't see in the big highlights reel of Indian history. So I would say pick and choose a theme and visit the specific places that you want to go. if you don't have a plan, then you need to be there for a longer period so that you can understand where you want to go or what you want to see. Because India has everything that you want. If you want history, it's there. If you want wildlife, it's there. If you want rainforest, it's there. If you want islands, there. Caves, diving, snow, skateboarding, cities like breathing with life there, nightlife there, beach life. You get yoga, you get massage. I mean, like there is specific places everywhere. So just everything is there. Just have to pick and choose. And a lot of the time, see, even though I've traveled to so many countries, I've begun to realize that India is the place where I can do everything. So I've started making a list, and it's a spreadsheet. I think I might have shared with you as well.
Yeah, you did.
I maintain it, and I'm like, I listen to a podcast called the Musafir Stories. I would recommend people to hear it as well. And they have amazing stories of people in India. So, I mean, if you are planning to go to India in that place, just have a look at their playlist and listen to the episode that the place that you want to go. So it's the perfect way you can visit that place. Yeah, so just be prepared and choose a theme to visit.
And what advice do you have beyond that for someone who wants to visit India?
So I would say just take some precautions when you go to India. Plan in advance where you go. At least think about what to do if you have limited time. Unless if you have no long time like you, then you don't have to. But if you have like a month only, then you should always have a plan in your head. Expect delays everywhere. Even if you think about going from one place to other, even by flight or train or by car, even the Google Maps said 3 hours is not going to be that. It's impossible going to be that. Expect the culture shock. So don't do silly things like drink from tap water. So then you'll be fine. And I would recommend take a tour from one place to the other. Like if you are going in that city, there will be tour operators who do cities tour. Then you will be perfectly fine. So if you want to enjoy food in Delhi, there is food trails in Delhi. If you want to go from Delhi to Agra Taj Mahal, there will be people who goes from Delhi to Taja. They will have tours. Just make sure you take it as a tour, and that's what I think. That's how you enjoy India most.
What's your favorite place that you've been to?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Okay, I'm going to be diplomatic and go, my city is my favorite place.
Okay.
Cannot go wrong.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, where I grew up, that's my favorite place. Okay, and I have not done a lot. So I haven't been to everywhere. So I don't even know what is my favorite as yet. So maybe 10 years down the line, we have a chat again and I might have better favorite.
Okay. I'll follow up with you. Lastly, I have to ask, partly because I really want the answer to this question. I don't know if you have it, but do you think that India will accept foreign travelers in the next year or two, or do you think it'll be a bit of a wait with the pandemic?
I think India will start accepting soon because they're vaccinating very quickly. I mean, recently my parents got vaccinated, so they are doing 1.5 million a day. I have a feeling that once maybe next year they'll start accepting it. I'm keen to go as well. Like the moment it opens up, the moment Australia allows it and India allows it, I'm happy to go. The moment it opens up and I have vaccines, I'm vaccinated, then I'm definitely going within the first month. I've already explained that to my employer that look, I'm going.
Yeah. I think we're probably going to try to go as soon as we can too, because we're so sad that we had to cancel the trip that we had planned.
Maybe you and I probably will visit at the same time.
Yeah, we'll meet up. Well, thank you so much. It's been so fun chatting with you. Is there anything you want to share with our alpaca pals, like your Instagram or anywhere that they can find you in case they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my Instagram is AnujPH with ANUJPH. I have pictures of places that I visited. It's not very big, but I'm quite active.
Alpaca Pals, I hope you enjoyed this discussion about India as much as I did. It was really fun to speak to Anuj, and I hope that all of you consider traveling to India at some point, because I promise you, it will be incredible. Alpaca My Bags is written and hosted by me, Erin Hines, and it's produced by Katie Lohr. If you enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and leave a review on your podcast app, or you can show us your love on Patreon. On Patreon, you can pledge just $5 a month, and it really helps us in making this show. For example, right now, Patreon is helping us pay the fees for hosting this podcast, and that helps us out a lot. So if you want to help, go to the link in our Patreon. It's in the show notes. That's all for now, Alpaca Pals. I'll talk to you again in 2 weeks, and I hope you all get to alpaca your bags safely and soon.